He didn't scream. That's what haunts me. Not the smell. Not the silence. Not even the body in the corner. Its skin pale as wax and limbs arranged like a broken doll. No, it's that he didn't scream. They say death is loud. A struggle. A final gasp. But in that flat, it was quiet. Chillingly quiet. Just the ticking of a clock, the creak of old wood, and the faint scratch of a fingernail against the floorboards. London is full of flats like that. Cramped, narrow, easy to overlook. You walk past them every day and never wonder what's happening inside. You assume the shadows at the window are harmless, that the smells from under the door are cooking, not rotting. But sometimes they aren't. This one, 23D Cranley Gardens, had secrets soaked into its walls. Secrets that had been living there for years. Some of them slept in the wardrobe. Others were hidden beneath the floorboards. One was boiling on the stove. No one knew. Not the neighbors who complained about the blocked drain. Not the dog who watched it all happen. Not the boys who accepted the drink, the smile, their invitation, and never made it out alive. He didn't look like a monster. He looked like someone's uncle. A civil servant. A man who said please and thank you. A man who listened. A man who helped you carry your bag. He waited for you at the pub, offered you warmth, and smiled with sad, tired eyes. He made you feel like you mattered, like you were safe. And then he killed you. Not quickly, not mercifully. He wanted you to stay. Forever. Even if that meant dismembering your body and feeding your remains to the plumbing. This is the story of how he lured them in, with kindness, quiet, and a chilling sort of patience. The story begins, as so many do, with a man who just wanted a drink. Dennis Nilsen blended in. Just another face in the crowded pubs of London, quietly nursing a drink, looking like someone waiting for a friend who would never show up. He scanned the room, not for conversation, but for opportunity, for someone who wouldn't be missed. Someone tired, lonely, looking for warmth in the dead chill of the city. It was January. The kind of night that froze your bones and left the streets slick with dirty slush. Inside the King's Cross pub, men came and went, the chatter and laughter hiding the emptiness that clung to so many of them. Young men with no families, sleeping in hostels, scraping by. Men who could disappear, and the world wouldn't blink. One of them caught his eye. Thin. Damp hair stuck to his forehead, his jacket barely holding together. He looked hungry, not just for food, but for someone to see him. Dennis smiled, not too wide, just enough to seem approachable. The boy hesitated before looking up, his expression equal parts curiosity and exhaustion. "You all right, mate?" Dennis said softly, leaning just close enough to be heard over the clatter of glasses. His Scottish accent gave his voice a gentle lilt. "Looks like you could use a drink." A pause. Then a faint smile. And just like that, the trap was set. There was nothing threatening about him. He looked like a man who would lend you a hand if you were lost, or pay for your drink if you were short on cash. He never pressed, never forced. Just a friendly offer. "It's freezing out there. Why don't we head back to mine? I've got whiskey and a warm meal. No trouble at all." It always started this way. A soft voice, a safe offer. The boy followed him out into the night, their footsteps echoing off wet pavement. Dennis carried himself like a host, even before they reached his flat. He chatted casually about his dog, about music, about the pub itself, making it all feel harmless. When they reached Cranley Gardens, the boy hesitated at the entrance. It was an old building, narrow hallways, the kind that felt like they could swallow you whole. Dennis unlocked the door, smiled, and said, "Come on, it's warmer inside." The flat smelled of stale cigarette smoke and cooking fat. A radio hummed faintly in the background. There were 2 mugs on the table, as if another guest had just left. Bleep, his dog, trotted up and nudged the boy's hand, tail wagging. "Sit," Dennis said, pouring whiskey into the glasses. "I'll make us something hot." The boy drank. It was strong, sharp enough to burn his throat. They ate. They talked. And then the world began to blur. Dennis watched him carefully. Always careful. He waited for the moment when his guest's eyelids drooped, when his movements slowed, when he stopped paying attention to the shadows creeping around him. Then Dennis moved behind him. No one knows the exact words he whispered. Maybe none at all. Maybe just silence. The ligature slipped over the boy's neck, and Dennis pulled. There was no scream, only a struggle, weak, desperate, fading with every second as the rope tightened. The boy's hands clawed at the cord, at Dennis's arms, at anything, but it was useless. When his body went limp, Dennis held on a little longer just to make. Sure, death didn't frighten Dennis Nilsen. It fascinated him. He lowered the body onto the carpet gently, like putting a child to bed. He stared down at the pale face, the lifeless eyes. For him, the murder wasn't the end. It was the beginning. That night, he washed the body in the tub. He dressed it in clean clothes. He sat it in the armchair by the window, as if it were just a guest staying the night. Then he poured himself another drink and talked to it. The boy was gone, but Dennis pretended he wasn't. He spoke to the corpse, touched it, arranged it like it was still alive. He wanted company, and now he had it, silent, obedient, never leaving. For days, he kept the body, slept beside it, moved it from chair to chair, as if shifting a roommate around the flat. When the decay became unbearable, he dismembered it. Slowly, methodically, with the cold precision of a butcher. The second one came easier. Once the threshold had been crossed, once death had been invited into that quiet little flat, it never left. It lingered in the wallpaper, the floorboards, the mattress. It waited with him in the evenings, whispering that he didn't have to be alone again. Not if he didn't want to. Dennis found the next one at the same kind of pub. Young, thin, desperate. A runaway, maybe. Or a drifter who'd slipped between the cracks of the system. London had plenty of them. He smiled, made their offer, and brought him home. Same whiskey. Same chair. Same story. This time, Dennis knew exactly what to do. He didn't hesitate. When the moment came, he slipped the cord around the man's throat and pulled until there was nothing left but silence. He sat with the body, drank beside it, played music and talked as if it could still hear him. There was no rage in him, no frenzy. Just a quiet satisfaction, like he'd completed a ritual. He undressed the corpse, bathed it, and brought it to bed. To Dennis Nilsen, these weren't just bodies. They were company. They couldn't leave him. They wouldn't walk out the door in the morning or tell him they weren't interested. They stayed. And in that stillness, in that grotesque parody of companionship, he felt safe. But death has a smell, and Rat is patient only for so long. At Melrose Avenue, his previous flat before Cranley Gardens, he'd had more freedom. He had a garden out back where he could dig shallow graves and bury the remains. He could burn bones in the fireplace when the smell got too strong. He boiled heads on the stove to remove. Flesh, reduced torsos to fragments, and discarded them with his trash. The neighbors sometimes asked about the smoke. It was thick, acrid, unnatural. Dennis would smile and say he was burning old clothes or cooking meat that had gone off. They never pressed, because he seemed normal, clean, quiet, polite. He fed his dog, paid his rent, and went to work at the job center like any civil servant might. Monday through Friday, he sat behind a desk helping people find employment. His co-workers described him as soft-spoken and strange, but never dangerous. They had no idea that on the weekends he was living among corpses. By 1981, he had killed over a dozen men. His floorboards creaked with secrets. Beneath them lay limbs wrapped in plastic, torsos bound in trash bags. In one wardrobe, a skull stared blankly from the darkness, perched between sweaters. Dennis would take them out sometimes, just to look, just to remember. He'd sit on the floor and talk to them. Apologize, maybe. Or pretend everything was fine, that they were still together, still listening. He lived in a museum of his own making. Each corpse a relic of loneliness, each room a monument to the absence of human connection. But eventually, the smell became too much. And so he moved. The new flat at Cranley Gardens was smaller. A tarp floor unit. No garden. No fireplace. No floorboards to pry up. Disposal would be a challenge. But Dennis was resourceful. He didn't stop killing. He simply adjusted. Instead of burying or burning the bodies, he began to dissect them more thoroughly. He stripped them of their identity, slicing away muscle, separating bone. The meat he wrapped in plastic. The innards he flushed. It sounds impossible. Ridiculous, even. But that's what he did. Night after night, he stood over the toilet, feeding it bits of men. Organs, tissue, fragments of what were once living, breathing people. He'd flush, listen to the gurgle, and do it again. When things clogged, he used boiling water. Caustic soda. His bare hands. The plumbing began to fail. But still, he didn't stop. He thought he was clever. That the water would carry it all away, down into the sewers, out of sight. But flesh doesn't disappear so easily. It lingers. It clings. It tells stories even after death. And down below, in the shared pipes of 23 Cranley Gardens, a secret began to swell. Yet Dennis kept on. He had become numb to the horror, if he ever felt it to begin with. There were no second thoughts. No regrets. One victim. A young man from Belfast came to the flat, drank with Dennis, and laughed at his jokes. They shared stories about work, family, old loves. Then, without warning, Dennis struck him from behind with a necktie. He held the body for hours afterward, crying into its hair. He claimed it was love. Another time, he kept a body in his bed for a week. He changed its clothes daily, brushed its hair, kissed its forehead before he left for work. When decomposition forced him to act, he pulled out his knives and made the cuts, always careful, always slow. There was no anger in it, only process. He catalogued them, in a way, each victim a chapter in his private narrative. Some he could name. Others he couldn't remember at all. But they were his. In life. In death. In pieces. The plumbing moaned. Drains backed up. Toilets bubbled. Tenants noticed a stench that clung to everything. Thick, putrid, impossible to ignore. They began to complain. The landlord grumbled. Maintenance came by and poked around, but found nothing. Until one day, a plumber was sent to the outside drain that serviced the whole building. It was early evening. The sun had dipped, and the air was heavy with cold. The plumber crouched, unscrewed the cover, and peered into the pipe. What he saw made his stomach turn. A foul mass, greyish-pink and greasy, clung to the pipe walls. It pulsed with the slow churn of water, trying to force its way past. He reached in with a gloved hand and pulled something out. It was soft. It looked like meat, and it had a smell no butcher's shop had ever known. The plumber stared at the lump in his hand. The texture was all wrong, slick, spongy, almost rubbery. At first, he thought it might be animal fat, flushed from someone's kitchen. But as he turned it over under the fading light, something shifted inside him. A primal unease. This wasn't animal. It was human. He didn't say anything right away. Just stood there, clutching that lump of tissue, the cold seeping into his gloves. The smell hit next, not just rot, but something deeper. A kind of death that hung in the lungs and clung to the throat. He reported the blockage, handed over the remains. The sample was sent for testing. The pathologist barely needed to look. Human flesh. Likely from a male. Cut with precision. The police returned to 23 Cranley Gardens. They knocked. The man who answered was calm. Neatly dressed. Spectacles balanced on his nose. "Oh," he said when they explained why they were there. "You're here. About the drains, aren't you?" The officers asked if they could come in. He hesitated, just a flicker of something behind their eyes. Then he stepped aside and opened the door. The smell inside was faint but undeniable. Bleach. Cleaning spray. Something acrid and desperate beneath it. The air was stale heavy, like a room that hadn't seen light or laughter in months. Dennis gestured to the sitting room. The police asked again. Had he noticed anything unusual with the drains? Had he flushed anything? A long pause. Then he looked down at the floor. "It's a long story," he said quietly. And then, to their utter disbelief, he added, "It was me." No shouting. No resistance. No panic. He just sat down and began to talk, as if he'd been waiting for someone to ask. "I killed them," he said. "About 15, maybe 16. I can't be sure." The officers stared at him, stunned. For a moment, they thought he was joking, some twisted fantasy or delusion. But he kept talking. "There are bodies in the wardrobe. In the bags. I cut them up. I flushed parts down the toilet. I had no choice." They asked where the rest were. He pointed calmly. "In the cupboard. I think you'll find a torso, maybe a head." They opened the doors with trembling hands. The bags were tied tight. Inside, a sour stench exploded the moment the plastic gave way. Chunks of flesh. Bones. A hand, still curled into a half-clench. In a cooking pot on the stove, submerged in cloudy water, they found a skull. Dennis stood in the doorway, watching. "They wouldn't leave me," he said. "So I kept them." Word spread fast. The building was evacuated. Forensics moved in. Cameras snapped. Neighbors whispered. Police carried out box after box, each heavier than the last, each one hiding what had once been a human being. Detectives tried to stay composed. But even the most seasoned officers had never seen anything like it. The flat was a charnel house. Every cupboard, every drawer, a crypt. There were photos, notes, sketches, tools, and bags upon bags of dissected remains. He had kept body parts for months, sometimes longer. When they began to rot, he boiled them on the stove, stored skulls under the sink, tucked bones into drawers. He lived in it, worked in it, slept in it, a man of routine. He showered every morning and went to his job at the job center, helping others rebuild their lives, while his own home rotted with the memory of the ones he had destroyed. Under questioning, he gave details, not proudly, not remorsefully, but almost wistfully, as if recalling lost loves. "I didn't want them to leave," he said. "They would leave like all the others, but if they were dead, they stayed." He described strangling them, bathing them, holding them after they were gone. He explained how he sat them in chairs, watched TV beside them, even talked to them for hours. "I needed them," he said. He admitted to flushing organs down the toilet because there was no garden to bury them in. "I tried to be careful," he said, "but I suppose the drains had their limit." When asked about the total number of victims, his answer chilled them. 15, maybe 16, he said. "But I've forgotten some of their names." Some victims had never even been identified. Strangers picked up in the night, erased completely, except for the bits of flesh pulled from a drain. He had no clear motive, no thrill of domination, no grand ideology, just loneliness, a deep, festering, corrosive loneliness that metastasized into something inhuman. The media erupted. London couldn't comprehend what had been living in their midst. They called him the kindly killer, the Muswell Hill murderer. But Dennis Nilsen didn't care for the names. He was content, in some warped way, that people were finally listening, finally paying attention. The trial began on October 24th, 1983. By then, the public had devoured every detail the press could print. The headlines were lurid. The monster of Muswell Hill, the man who lived with corpses, bodies in the wardrobe. But in the courtroom, things were eerily subdued. Nilsen sat in the dark, composed, clean-cut, hands folded in his lap. He looked more like a librarian than a murderer. He was charged with 6 counts of murder and 2 of attempted murder. The rest were dropped either due to lack of evidence or because the victims had never been identified. Even in death, some of them remained lost. Dennis Nilsen pled not guilty, not because he denied the killings. He never had. He detailed them in calm, horrific language to the police. No, his defense was that he was not of sound mind, that he suffered from diminished responsibility, that something inside him was broken, some defect of empathy, of humanity, and that he couldn't help himself. It was a fight between 2 versions of Dennis Nilsen. The prosecution painted him as a calculating predator, cold, deliberate, a man who chose his victims carefully, planned the killings, disposed of the bodies, and covered his tracks. This was not madness, they argued. This was method. The defense presented a different picture, a lonely, disturbed soul shaped by childhood trauma and repressed desire. A man who had begged for connection and killed only to keep it. They called psychologists who diagnosed him with narcissistic personality disorder, borderline tendencies, and severe detachment from reality. But none of that explained the tenderness, the cooking, the bathing, the posing of corpses in chairs, the conversations held with rotting bodies days after death. It was methodical, controlled, ritualistic. He wasn't out of control. He was in control the whole time. For weeks, The jury listened to accounts that tested their sanity. The men he had killed, strangers, acquaintances, young men seeking shelter or something more. Some came willingly. Others were too intoxicated to resist. Many were strangled while they slept. Then there were the survivors. One man told the court how Nilsen had offered him a drink, then tried to strangle him. He passed out. When he came to, Dennis was apologizing profusely, claiming he had made a mistake, that it had all been a moment of madness. He even offered the man breakfast the next morning, before letting him go. Another had escaped after a struggle, running barefoot into the street, leaving blood across the hallway carpet. Each testimony peeled back another layer of the facade. Each story chipped away at the image of a lonely man consumed by delusion. He knew what he was doing. He just didn't care. On November 3rd, 1983, the jury delivered its verdict. Dennis Andrew Nilsen was found guilty of 6 counts of murder and 2 of attempted murder. The judge didn't hesitate. He sentenced Nilsen to life imprisonment, with a recommendation that he serve at least 25 years. In practice, it meant he would die behind bars. The judge's words were sharp, deliberate. "You are a danger to the public. You have shown no real remorse, only self-pity. These were horrific and calculated crimes. There is no justification, no excuse." Dennis Nilsen was taken to H. Shemp. Wormwood Scrubs, then later to H. Shemp. Full Sutton. Behind bars, he remained calm, even cooperative. He wrote endlessly, letters, journals, reflections on his crimes. He considered himself intelligent, even artistic. He wanted to publish a memoir, but it was blocked. He lived a long time in prison. Too long, some would say. In 2018, he collapsed in his cell. He had suffered a ruptured abdominal aortic aneurysm. Emergency surgery was performed, but complications followed. He died on May 12, 2018. His body was cremated. No family came to claim the ashes. No marker was placed. No one mourned him. But his legacy remained. Not in the way he wanted, not in the words he wrote, or the justification he offered. It lingered in the systems he slipped through. The social indifference that allowed him to go unnoticed for years. The way society looked past the homeless, the addicts, the lost boys who vanished without alarm. The drainpipe held more truth than the headlines ever could. To this day, not all of his victims have been named. Some were never reported missing. No fingerprints. No records. Just bones, flushed and forgotten. Dennis Nilsen didn't just kill people. He erased them. You never know who you're sitting next to. You never know what's happening behind the door, down the hall. He looked like a man who would help you with your CV. A man who would lend you £1 for the bus. A man who said, "Come in, it's cold out there." And by the time you realized the door had locked behind you, it was already too late. Because Dennis Nilsen didn't need you to stay forever. He just needed you to stop leaving.